You're listening to the Physio Matters Podcast in association with Choose Health, and this is session 13. Welcome to the anniversary edition of the Physio Matters Podcast. We've been live for 12 months, and thank you all for tuning in and therefore keeping us motivated. Many thanks to those who gave feedback on session 12, the K-tape debate, but do not be paying lip service to change. If you want to make changes to your practice and fancy giving K-tape a go, don't be shy to use our discount code with RockTape to get 40% off their products. Simply type Choose Health, all one word, and we look forward to hearing what you think. But that was so last year. We best say hello to 2015, and with that, New Year is a time for reflection, and so I gathered the until now silent podcast team for a critical review of our year in podcasts. We discussed the process, the episodes, the feedback, and of course the future plans. We have a special return snippet from a previous podcast guest and some insights from our IT wizard Paul. The podcast team are the big cogs in the machine. Rich and Danni write the timelines, prep the newsletters, tweet the links and research our topics. Charlotte, who is the better half of Choose Health and therefore the ever-suffering live-in second-line editor, is forever picking up the pieces and winding my neck in when my ideas get a little bit too ambitious. Paul Bibby is the IT genius who made us far more than just a podcast. From editing to marketing to brutal Twitter banter, the boy is invaluable. Stay tuned until the end for some surprising revelations as we pick our favourite and least favourite sessions of the podcast and reveal our wish list for future episodes. So let's get to it. Welcome to the Physio Matters Podcast Team Christmas party. Who are you? What are you drinking?
My name's Rich Barnes. I'm an MSK physio in Nottingham and in private practice in Derby. As it's Christmas, I'm on a pint of sherry and an avocado chaser.
Nice. How about you then, Mr. Smart?
My name's Danni Smart. As with Rich, I'm an MSK physiotherapist working in both NHS and private settings. And my Christmas drink will be a mulled cider.
I'm surprised you're not drinking some sort of hipster craft beer, Danni. Is that not going to be your...
Not tonight, mate.
All right, makes us a change. And Charlotte?
Hi, I'm Charlotte. I am a paediatric physio full-time in the NHS at the Children's Hospital in Manchester. And I think if we're on the Christmas theme, it'll be a mulled wine for me, please. Lovely.
And so, best question for the listeners, I reckon, then, how did you come to be involved in the podcast? Starting with you, Danni.
It happened a while back, mate, didn't it? When me and you sort of brainstormed some ideas on a motorway travel stop. And, we just gathered some thoughts on the structure of the podcast and how we could put it into practice.
Good stuff. And I wrote you in from there. And how about you then, Char?
I think mine was more a necessity over choice. It was to be part of it or to be party to it. So I chose to be part of it and do some of the more silent, behind-the-scenes kind of stuff. The whole idea of listening to this podcast is already making me a little bit nervous.
Okay, silent until now. How about you, Barnes? How did I drag you involved?
I was clearly just press ganged, to be fair. It was doing or have your career ruined. So that was where it came from me. No, I think very much as with Danni. I was lucky enough to be kind of in your midst at the infancy when this sort of idea started to become a viable option, and was lucky enough to be asked to do a little bit with you, and it sort of sprouted from there.
Oh, well, appreciate all your time, but none of you would have got any references if you hadn't have helped me, so thanks again. And it's fair to say that 2014 has been a bigger year for the project than any of us could have imagined. What would you say the best part of the whole process has been for you?
I think, for me, to be honest, it's just watching it grow. Obviously, we've all known it right from the beginning, and I think seeing it just as an idea on a piece of paper and a pipe dream, to see how quickly it has grown within the year, I think has been quite nice to watch sort of from behind the scenes. It's nice to go to courses and places and hear people talking about it and think, oh yeah, that's something that we're involved in. And I think the valuable lessons and discussions that happen behind the mic are quite nice to put out there for the public to hear. And it's been a great set of guests that we've had to do so.
Yeah, anything to add, Barnes?
I think, certainly from someone who's been on lots of CPD courses in the past and perhaps come away disappointed a lot of the time, I think the ability to be able to be, have professionals at the top of their game there and giving their insights and valuable evidence-based sort of opinions is invaluable, and it's a fantastic platform, particularly with the advances in social media that have sort of sprouted out in the last 2 years. So yeah, being involved in from that and seeing it grow into such a big thing social media wise has been brilliant.
Cool. Anything smart?
Well, mate, it's just nice to just listen to other colleagues and staff use that information which they've learned from the podcast and apply it clinically. It's all very well reading a journal sometimes, but it can be a little bit of a hierarchical snobbiness really on some research sometimes, and utilising that information on a podcast has been really sort of evident since this has been released, I think.
May I ask, what would be your least favourite? Has the podcast been a burden at times? What goes on behind the scenes, time and effort wise, can't be underestimated, I'm sure.
Yeah, I think certainly time wise, it's something that we've all had to allocate a little bit of time outside our normal practice, and we're all professional clinical people, so we've all got more than one day job in certain senses as well. And certainly time has often been against us, certainly with doing the sort of backup side of things as well, timelines, extra information, gathering. Obviously, you've got your guys that work on the stats and all the IT side of things. So yeah, time's probably always the least available thing for us to do.
Okay, hopefully still worthwhile though. And Danni, what do you reckon?
Yeah, I suppose you'll be in a better position to say this more than me, mate. But I think certainly the technology which goes into organising something like this, and I'm sure you'll talk about that later. But getting everything to work at the correct time, I think, is always a challenge.
Yeah, for sure. No, I'd agree with that, and I think probably Charlotte. I think you probably can give an insight into the burdens more than anyone.
Agreed. I think it's funny that we all seem to agree on the same thing, that time and technology are the hardest parts of it. And I mean, particularly my least favourite is the last Sunday of the month before 7 o'clock, having to endure the stresses of the Sunday daytime of, is it going to work? Is it going to get up there? Is anyone going to listen to it? Like, all of that. I think that's the hardest thing, because they're the bits that, in our toolkit, we've got a lot of things we can do as physios, but as technology experts, it's not really our bag.
Yeah, definitely.
Would you agree?
I couldn't agree more with that, guys. I think you've all mentioned it somewhere. One member of the team who's been integral to the process is our IT wizard and all-round banter pest, which is Paul Bibby. He couldn't be with us tonight, mainly because he's conference calling Google, Microsoft and Sony all at the same time. Fortunately enough, I was able to catch up with him just to make sure he was on the episode and get our soon-to-be annual stats update. Who are you, and what makes you qualified for such a prestigious position in the Physio Matters Podcast Team?
I'm Paul Bibby. I'm an IT consultant working primarily in software as a service solutions in Media City, Manchester. What makes me rather uniquely qualified to advise on projects such as this is that I'm actually also a chartered physiotherapist.
Right, now you're going to have to elaborate a little on that for the listeners, because quite rightly they won't believe you.
Yeah, so most people don't. I started working in IT for many years and I got fed up with sitting behind a desk all day. I wanted to do something a little bit more face-to-face and rewarding. So I studied physio and I graduated in 2007 and I worked in the NHS up until about 2013, when I was then tempted back into IT by a previous colleague of mine who set up his own company and got a lot of VC backing and was a really exciting opportunity. So that's what makes me qualified to advise on all your daft ideas for Choose Health, including this podcast.
Lovely. So your debut behind the microphones is to deliver the first annual statistic update. So without further ado, what are the numbers?
Okay, so across all platforms, including iTunes, the Choose Health website, Android apps, and more recently YouTube, from sessions 1 to 12, we have had just over 260,000 full listens, which we count as anything over 90% of an episode. We average between 19,000 and 28,000 listeners per episode, and they are spread across 27 countries, so pretty good. UK clinicians are seemingly most tolerant of your accent, with 70% of listenership, but we have a growing number of Canadians, Aussies and Kiwis tuning in each month too. YouTube is by far our lowest yielding platform, which is a bit of a surprise, but was a clever move for our Google standings, and Twitter remains our primary marketing tool despite only a low number of our listeners interacting with us. So far anyway.
Okay, wow, big numbers. And so before I leave you to stare at more screens with your IT mates, what IT innovations will Choose Health be bringing to the table in 2015?
I think the biggest impact will be in the new premises towards the end of spring. And to go alongside of that, I'm currently working on an online system where patients are referred to evidence-based material prior to and following a Choose Health assessment. Our hope is to have every patient under our care and under the care of people who are listening to our podcasts, properly informed by reputable sources rather than just predominantly misleading mainstream media.
Lovely, that sounds great. Looking forward to that, and thank you very much for all your work this year.
You're welcome, Jack.
So as we say, Paul's been a big part of it, but anything you can add about or want to mention about his contributions, Rich?
Well, I think clearly he's been well ensconced in the background and not getting the fame and accolades that you yourself get. But clearly, certainly things like his presence on Twitter. I know that I've dipped in and out, certainly with updates on Twitter and with reposts and things like that, retweets. But I know that he's put a lot into sort of making sure that stays current and is still a viable means of advertising upcoming podcasts. So yeah, he's done a brilliant job from that point of view.
And I mean, he's usually, I don't know, he's promoting what we're doing, but also he's just giving me loads of banter like all the time. Do you not think that's a bit cruel?
No, I think anybody who can banter you out is definitely worth more than his weight in gold, to be fair.
I think if you choose to record your own voice for enjoyment, then that banter's deserved, hey?
Cheers, team. Right, nice one. So let's review a year in podcast. We started off with a bang. 3 episodes with the English Institute of Sport's Physio Superstars. So that's Dr. Lee Harrington and Dr. Ian Horsley. First we did patellofemoral pain syndrome and then the rugby shoulder. What were the strengths and weaknesses of our early efforts then, do you reckon, guys?
I think it was nice to hear some commonly encountered pathologies and the best research around those, and the skills which you can sort of take away and put into practice in the clinic. Because I think sometimes you get a lot of podcasts often cover the more rarer pathologies or the less commonly encountered pathologies, and sometimes we can't always apply that. So especially with Lee Harrington's sort of patellofemoral pain syndrome, I thought that was a real nice opener to start the podcast off.
I think one of the strengths, obviously, from the beginning is, like you said, we started with a bang. So we managed to get these 2 really well-respected, researched, clinically excellent people in Lee and Ian to come and record a podcast that had not even been launched. So they had no examples to go from, yet they were willing to give up their time to put their opinions out there. And I think it says a lot for the profession, and it says a lot for those 2 in particular, that before anything was even there as a pilot for them, they were willing to try and change the face of physio and try and get some, good, honest research and opinions out there. I think one of the strengths of the podcast is, even though they were early days, it was always quite easy listening from a finished product point of view. But I think from our editing point of view, it wasn't always easy listening because I didn't know exactly what we were listening for. And certainly speed from an editing aspect was a real difficulty in the first few episodes. What do you reckon, Rich?
Yeah. I think certainly one of the things I remember Jack talking to me about after he'd spoken to Lee Harrington was how the room didn't really suit what they were trying to do. There was lots of echo that you could hear, and I think the actual, not so much the content, but the kind of the technical side of things was clearly in the opening couple of podcasts was something that you looked to rectify, quite quickly.
Yeah, it was a tricky one, but just I think Char got it right there with just incredible that they would give us that chance and to approach it from a slightly different angle to what else was out there in the market, and to come at things with a critical angle without offending folk. So that was nice.
Did you learn much from it, Jack?
Did I learn much from it? Oh,
yeah.
Massively. I mean, I learned hugely from the process at that moment in time because it was all so new and complicated with the technology, etc. But fundamentally, I sort of realised at that stage that if it all failed and no one else listened to it and it didn't take off as we intended, then I was sat in a room asking people what I wanted to ask them, and these were industry experts that I knew I could learn from. So even if no one ever listened or tuned into iTunes or YouTube or wherever we put it, then I was going to gain something from just this pilot idea. And so I learned an awful lot, both clinically and personally, just how difficult it was going to be as a process, but also what we could maybe offer. Once it started to work, then I really thought, no, this is something that putting a critical spin on physiotherapy and trying to ask the awkward questions was going to hold some value.
Yeah. I think one of the real strengths was you managed to ask the right questions, and that was always a challenge when you got such, quite vast topics, the rugby shoulder and knee pain, anterior knee pain, and it's just like, what questions do you ask?
Yeah. The prep that went into that sort of stuff, but as a team, that can't be underestimated. It doesn't just roll off my tongue. I'd like to pretend it does sometimes, but it certainly doesn't. So no, I'm glad it's gone well, and that was a good start because we then launched Mike Stewart, our mate's No Pain brand, on the world. His podcast seemed to have gone down well.
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, earlier this year I had the pleasure of being an exhibitor with Mike at the Therapy Expo, and to work on his stand and to see how he promotes his brand and puts it across. It's really nice. He's such a genuine guy, and I think you really get that from the podcasts, and it was great to be part of sort of the no pain ethos. And I think for me in particular, this was a really valuable podcast because of the idea behind explaining pain and teaching pain. Working in a paediatric world, it's not often that you will get a patient that understands pain, or that if you give them the simple scientific explanation, they're able to understand it. So it was really nice to get some applicable clinical knowledge for the current patient base that I'm working with.
Well, obviously, I've pinched a lot of the ideas that I thought were yours, which have subsequently turned out to have been Mike's. So clearly, by osmosis, he's indoctrinating us one no pain physio at a time. But yeah, no, I've hugely beneficial podcast. Really like the way that Mike expresses himself and his use of language and his use of simple teaching techniques to get a message across to patients, which seems to have a fantastic effect and something that I use a lot now in my own clinical practice. But the fact that you had the ability to work together to launch his brand and see that sort of fly away as it has this year, with him starting to get requests to go out to New Zealand and things like that to go and present is it's a fillip for the podcast as well, I guess.
For sure. And what do you reckon then, Danny? Anything to add?
Well, he sort of he kicked off the train of metaphors, didn't he? Which sort of worked its way into each episode of the podcast after that. But yeah, he seems to bring the pain sciences and makes them a little bit more friendly, doesn't he? So we can use them a little bit easier in clinic, I think.
Yeah, a little bit of balance as well to his work. He just seems to seems to understand that it doesn't have to be neurocentric. It's just about trying to help people and empower them to move and to try and get people engaged in it not being this complex being that is pain science.
Definitely. One thing I will not forgive him for is the 4 hours of raw material that we had to sift through to make those podcasts. But I suppose if it came out good, then I'll have to get over it someday.
Cool. Well, we've got a clip actually. I had a little chat with Mike about what he thought of the podcast, what it did for him, what he maybe didn't like about it as well. So we'll edit that bit into the conversation. So, Mike, welcome back to Behind the Microphones. We recorded an interview even prior to the podcast existing. You've had a busy year since then. What's been going on?
It's been really busy, yeah. My year's it's gone through the roof, really. I mean, in terms of no pain courses, I used to be doing lots of work locally, and then the weekend that we chatted on the podcast, I'd come up obviously to you in Nottingham to do a talk. And since then, it's spiraled, which is great, really. It's been really enjoyable going around the country teaching lots of different clinicians, and the feedback's been amazing, as you can probably see from Twitter if you're on Twitter.
Yeah, we explored Twitter, and you launched, obviously, off the back of the podcast. You then went on a Twitter charm offensive. So, well, as far as being on the podcast and the experience of from your side, what was it like as a process?
It was great. It was fantastic. Well, I think especially because we know each other of old, and I think whenever I got feedback from people who'd listened to our podcast, what came across was just the sort of relaxed chat that we had, really. I suppose it was nice to talk to each other as two clinicians who've worked together and know all of the complexities and problems that come with treating people in practice, and especially with complex pain. So I think that's the feedback that I've had when I've chatted to people on courses, when they've come on the courses after listening to the podcast, that they found it very useful. And it's been great. I don't know about you, Jack, but it's been really nice for me to listen to people from all over the world. I think that's the great thing about podcasts, is you get to reach people from far-flung places who you'd never normally get to interact with. And that's the great thing about the podcasts, and then following that up with Twitter, really.
Absolutely. No, it's worked well, and you've really worked both platforms well. And as far as the other guests, I know you've been a listener since your interview, but what's been highlights for you?
Well, I think obviously Adam Meakins. I really enjoy Adam's thinking, his critical thinking, and again, it's been lovely as well since we did our podcast, being able to meet up with lots of the people who you've spoken to. Adam's great, Seth O'Neill's great. I've caught up as well with Lee Harrington, and the time when you helped me out, you and Char, when we came up to the Therapy Expo in Manchester, got to meet lots of people there and discuss practice and changes that are needed in practice. And since then, I've gone to catch up with Adam Meakins down at his workplace in Hertfordshire. So I've got to know Adam quite well, and he's a very nice chap.
Often a bit of a thing that surprises folk. Adam Meakins being a nice, polite chap.
Well, yeah, who'd have thought it? But a very, very nice chap. I think I think a lot of the comments that he makes on Twitter are purely coming from the heart, really. I don't think he means any malice in what he's saying. And sometimes I think that the best way to try and change things for the better is to stir the pot and try and heat up a bit of dichotomy, try and get a bit of a reaction to, as you said, the Lady Gaga reaction. But I think it's fabulous. And I think, I've met up with so many people through Twitter and who've attended courses. Paula Meakin in Staffordshire, I met her recently or a while ago when we did a course together. And that was great. And
is she related to Paula Deakin?
Oh, did I say Meakin? Should I go again on that one?
No.
Meakin. Who? Oh, it was Meakin and Adam Meakin. Oh, no. Oh, Deakin and Meakin.
it's a ridiculously large family of free thinkers and people that aren't shy of sharing their points and being comfortable with what they're saying as well, being confident to put it out there publicly. I think that's really helpful. As far as we're talking about a podcast process, so to speak, is there anything in which you would say you'd like to, or direction you'd like to see it go, or a way in which we might do things differently?
Well, I think somebody mentioned about running a conference, a Physio Matters conference to get everyone together, and I think the podcasts are great. I sometimes feel that the podcast format itself, great. It gives you some great ideas as to what to do in practice and how to change a few things. But I think then maybe to follow that up with conference talks or further learning, maybe webinars, courses. But I suppose that's really what everybody's doing. I've spoken to people who've been on to my courses following the podcast, and I'm sure Seth and Adam and others have as well. So I think it's a great platform to discuss what's happening out there in terms of the evidence and how practice is changing, and then people then choose to follow that up through the more traditional CPD routes.
Oh, brilliant! No, it's been great on our little review podcast to get an old guest back on. Not to call you old.
Well, almost. Cool.
But is there anything else you'd like to add before we wrap up and leave you to your leftover turkey?
Yeah, I think it's been fabulous. It's been so nice for me. Somebody said to me a while ago, what's it like running these courses, and I really enjoy it, and I think it's been so nice to talk to so many people as a clinician teaching other clinicians, and keeping things so practical. And it's been great to get all the feedback, and I thoroughly look forward to maybe doing another podcast in future and discussing things further.
Absolutely. I'm sure we can always find some room behind the microphones for you, mate, and all the best. Have a happy new year, and thanks again for all your contributions.
And to you, Jack, thanks again. Happy New Year, everybody.
The pre-recorded trial run was then over, and so we had some podcasts that we realised that it was going to work, and then we had a few podcasts which were inspired by public demand and some Twitter noisiness. So we had Seth O'Neill, Adam Meekins and Alan Taylor all very active on Twitter. Any highs and lows from these few podcasts then, Rich?
I think it's interesting again that you managed to get people who are so very active on Twitter to come on board. I think it was interesting that Seth presented so eloquently on tendons, but obviously I think one of the downsides of that was he'd got his own research stuff going on, which meant that he had to hold back a little bit, I guess, on some of the content, which thankfully we've managed to get in the updated session that he did for us in October. So that helped a lot. I think we all know Mr. Meekins. Personally, I really like his style. I know he has a way of sort of expressing himself, which might not be akin to most people's thoughts, or some people's thoughts, should I say? But genuinely, I think he's working for the best good of the profession in the way he's presenting himself. So that was good as well. And again with Alan, I think very measured in his sort of thinking and the way he talks about hemodynamics, and gets you to think maybe slightly outside of the box for those troublesome patients that you've tried lots and lots of different things but never even thought about the fact that it might be a hemodynamic problem as to why they're getting their leg pain with their back pain.
Yeah, brilliant. And Danny, anything to add on that?
Yeah, for me, mate, it really brought to light a bit of the dark nature of social networking, and I think trolling has certainly been a little bit more evident this year on Twitter as it has emerged as a bit of a learning resource for a lot of therapists. There's also been a bit of an emergence of this trolling concept, and I think in order for the profession to maintain its credibility, I think that's something that's got to be governed a little bit more. As therapists continue to sort of tweet as it be.
But with that, do you feel like the podcast brought these tweets to life a little bit, humanised these
I
thoughts?
I think you're right, mate. And you almost come to realise there's a human behind making these tweets.
Yeah.
Something which is easy to forget, I suppose. And people, I think people become so passionate about their topic of interest that it can get personal, and that's a shame. It shouldn't do so. But I thought especially in the podcast with Adam Meakin, you asked the right questions, and I think it gave Adam Meakins a bit of a position to explain himself. Not explain himself, but discuss those sort of things a little bit further.
Yeah, it's like you said, Danny. It made a person out of the sports physio, didn't it?
Absolutely.
It wasn't just the guy that puts the controversy out there for everybody to get home and think, oh, what's he said today?
Yeah.
Kind of thing.
Showed him for the lovely, cuddly, just turned 40-year-old that he is.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
He'll thank you for that. He'll thank you for that. And I know that since the podcast, really, Alan's become a particularly noisy character, making sure that people don't just hide behind a new version of bias. And so I've quite enjoyed that, and I'm sure we'll get him back behind the microphones at some point.
Yeah, very much. Seen him joust with the NOI group a little bit on Twitter, so that's been interesting to follow.
For sure, and it's interesting from the statistics because we talk a bit about Twitter and stuff, and we do some promotion, of course, on there. But most of our listeners, vast majority of our listeners, aren't on Twitter. They don't follow us on Twitter. We only had, I think, last count it was 4%. I think, might even be less of a percentage as we've grown on Twitter. So it was interesting then for our work to suddenly get recognised by some higher powers, partly thanks to your guys' work on Twitter. The MACP then commissioned a series of podcasts as we became a respected postgraduate education platform. So we had psychological interventions with Dr. Richard Bennett and exercise prescription with Anne Gates, which brought an influx of new listeners, proved very popular in terms of feedback. Maybe do you think that was because there were such broad topics?
I think, from my point of view, I think it was really good to have a physio special interest group want to commission these podcasts done by non-physios. It's nice to show that rather than just playing lip service to the fact that we respect and want to work with other professions, it's nice to see what capacity we've got to learn from them too. Because, how much psychology affects your treatment as a physio is unbelievable, yet you don't even touch on it at university. So to have that ability to spend some of your own time listening to it rather than thinking, right, I'd like to know a bit more but I don't want to necessarily pay to go on a course, it's nice to have that capacity to have things broken down in a simple way, really, which I think Richard Bennett in particular did fantastically well.
Yeah, I'd agree. I think we almost huddle together as a mass as physios a lot of the time, and sometimes looking outside can be difficult. But I think it's a way that we're going to have to go. Certainly in physiotherapy, and it's a way that the profession seems to be moving very well. With the kind of extended roles that we're taking now in extended scope practitioner work. Injectors, sonographers. Things of that, and I think having the ability to even spark a light with other professions that might add to our clinical expertise can only be a good thing.
Brilliant. Any highlights from those two, Danny?
I think just Richard Bennett in particular, he really was able to, although, as Char said, being a non-therapist, he was able to very much apply it to us clinically. So we could really relate to that, I think, his examples and applying these sort of cognitive treatments.
Yeah, and I think one of the things that I thought about from Anne's point of view is she kind of brought, as much as we're all aware that exercise groups happen and it's important for everyone to exercise, she kind of brought that side of actually look around what's in the community. If you are a private therapist, you might not have considered those options and you might not have the same facilities or group availability as the NHS, so it might have made you explore a little bit what is around your area maybe.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that was something that I gathered from. I mean, both of them for me, it just flowed so nicely. It was. I'm sure it wasn't an accident, or I know it wasn't an accident from the MACP, but to use psychological interventions to engage someone and empower them to change, and then for the next podcast to then be one of the most important changes that we can instigate as therapists, which is to get people moving more and to understand why they need to get moving more. It just seemed to flow really nicely. And again, of course, as Charlotte said, many thanks to the MACP for recognising that, and long may that relationship continue.
I think the worst bit about those were the cheesier promotional videos and photos that came alongside.
About time. I was just waiting for that chance to get my face on something. It's like face for radio.
Good job it was jeans and white trainers weren't the best look, hey, with the shirt.
Yeah. And the jumper has been highlighted.
The horizontal stripes.
Not a good look.
Not slimming, are they? Boobs.
Not a good look when you're 7'2".
Cheers, guys. Cheers. And we then went back, as promised, to Seth O'Neill following the International Tendon Symposium for a special Treating Tendons podcast. Danni, you're our resident tendon geek. What did you think of the podcast? And also, you were at the conference, so anything you want to tell us about those?
Oh, mate, myself, I've got a bit of an interest in tendons, but to attend such a conference like that, where I was amongst people far more intelligent than myself, and Seth, I could see Seth, and he was in his element, certainly. And he summarised what was probably clinically relevant beautifully in those podcasts. He was able to really cover the hot topics, because at the conference there was a lot of basic science, and trying to filter that information as to what was relevant and I could take away and put into practice was quite challenging, and I think he did that perfectly.
So, as someone that's into tendons, it didn't just cover what you already knew. It was something that broke it down and was clinically applicable even for you, would you say?
Yeah, I think so. I think it provoked thought, and it made me certainly understand how much we don't know about tendons, and that ranges from the structure itself to how we go about managing them. So it's certainly not a black and white structure.
Oh, cool. And anything you guys want to add?
I think the one thing that Seth did fantastically in certainly in the second podcast, which I have to say I reviewed not a million days ago, as a bit of prep for this, but I think he summarises the really salient points really simply, really well, and gives you things that you can go away and think about and use. I certainly think looking at the discussions around loading tendons, staging tendons, all of the things that we've all talked about and heard about with the likes of Cook and Purdom and Peter Malieris's work and Alison Grimaldi's work. But he summarised it all really, really well in the podcast and gave some really great bite-sized bits to go away and think about using clinically.
Yeah, he's just an editor's dream as well. He knows exactly what he's saying, so it's so straightforward to sort out his podcast.
It doesn't sound like there's any stopping edited parts. It just flows, doesn't it?
Yeah.
I mean, it's great that he flows so well, but there's just not enough time for me to start talking. That's what upsets me. I think he forgets who the star of the show is sometimes, Mr. O'Neill. But an absolute joy and a top bloke, another person that we're massively honoured to have involved and to do 2 podcasts spaced as he did, also in his own home, in his own clinical time. Massive thanks to him for that. We then we finished with a flourish. Okay, we did the big kinesiology tape debate. What did you guys think, and which side of the fence did you end up?
I mean, I think the end product is a great thing, because you can almost finish still sitting on the fence, because both polls give such a good argument for why and why not. I think, with considering everything said in the podcast and considering times in practice where I have used K-tape, I would have to sit on the side of taping when it's necessary. I mean, in peds, there's no denying the fact that if you put on tape and see an improvement, whether it's just the proprioception from the tape on the skin, so what? If it works, it works. So that's where I ended up.
Okay.
Yeah, hugely. I know. I'd agree. I think the difficulty is we want so much to be evidence based in our practice and in our clinical thinking, and whilst I advocate that hugely, we don't know why some things work; they just work. I don't use K-tape a lot, but I have used it. But I think, and again, I go back to kind of how Adam Meakins describes things, that as long as you don't knowingly tell a lie about what you think it's doing, because you've been blinded by the marketing blurb or blinded by a course, I think if you can say, well, we don't know why it works, but it might be this, but we can give it a try. And I think that's how I tend to use any sort of thing like taping, or any sort of typical two fingers adjunct sort of that we would use in physiotherapy. I'm very clear a lot of the time as to say, maybe we don't have an idea. This might be why it works, but I guess we can't say for certain. But I don't think there's anything worse than not giving it a try if there's nothing else that's happened and helped.
Having worked with all of you, particularly you, Danni, I think before the podcast, I'd say maybe you'd be on the side of the Westwood side of the fence, in that you wouldn't necessarily want to instigate any sort of reliance on from your patient. But do you feel that Paul Coker made enough point to realise that it has its place?
He did, mate, and I think he argued his point really well. And it was a great way to end the year of the podcast, wasn't it? Because the fact that we had these two guys who were obviously really passionate about the topic and had really strong thoughts as to how that should be sort of portrayed. So it was a great way to end the year. But I'd agree. I mean, since that podcast, I've been using K-tape a lot more and exploring its effects. And I think like Sharon Barney said, we do see results from it. But I think personally, we should perhaps be moving away from the questions of these individual passive therapies, and we do know that they can have a positive influence on people's symptoms, certainly in the shorter term. But perhaps we should be posing the question more on, should we be using them as a short-term pain relieving tool?
Yeah, it's a very tough one, and we I know you guys enough to know that all of these things are facilitatory. It's not just. I mean, saying it's not a standalone is often a bit of a cop out, but it's the way in which it's presented, and I think that's the key thing, is that it's selling things as being biologically feasible and a small part of a bigger process, which is to actively engage in your own recovery, which I know is all of our stances, I think is fair to say.
I tell all my patients the blue ones are the best.
Mine are a bit harder. They're on the blue or the pink side, depending.
Yeah, all my blue tape patients get better.
Well, it's the blue tape's for cooling things down, isn't it? I think it was a tough one to execute, but definitely the best team effort.
And I think the key with that one as well, though, and maybe one for next year, to look forward to even more, is getting those people together who might have opposing opinions, and using the time and space to have a not a clinical Barney, but for the people to pose the difficult questions, and you almost to act as the referee and ringmaster.
I think the debate and the discussion, it's a nice format to follow. I think it kind of shows what learning should be about. I mean, we've all sat through in-service trainings where someone does a presentation and just literally recites what they've written on their slides, and then nobody has anything to say. And for me, there's nothing more frustrating than people not actively, like we just said about patients, not actively taking participation in getting better, people not actively taking participation in their learning. And I think that's one thing that the podcast shows people are willing to do, because nobody makes you listen to them. It's all choice. Well, for listeners, maybe not for us.
So if I go to you first, then Danni, what would you say your favourite and least favourite episode would be?
So I think probably obviously from your point, mate, but I really enjoyed Seth's Treating Tendons podcast. I think they were the ones which were probably the most user-friendly. and I think we could listen to them one evening and then go away and put them into practice the following morning. So I thought his was brilliant. Certainly his and the rugby shoulder. I wouldn't say, I wouldn't, actively say there was any sort of particular negatives. I think one of those which I didn't perhaps get the most value from was perhaps exercise prescription with Anne Gates, for the sole fact being that, we already understand that exercise is quite key in, people's health. But it's just, I suppose, trying to apply that and making it available to the wider population. That's where the real challenge lies, isn't it?
Yeah, for sure. And Rich, what would you say your faves and least faves?
I think probably joint ones, really, I guess. I think, obviously, Mike Stewart's work, is really of interest to me. So I enjoyed, both of those podcasts immensely, and also following on from that, looking at the other sort of psychological components, the Dr. Richard Bennett stuff as well, was immensely useful. I think particularly it being, as Char said earlier, someone not from a physio background, and seeing how perhaps a different profession's perceptions of psychological interventions matches our own. I think for me, maybe I'd probably go the complete antithesis of Danni and probably go with the rugby shoulder. I think, which sounds weird from someone who was working in rugby up until kind of about 4 or 5 months ago, but I think it was useful to a certain extent. But I think we see, certainly in our practice, a lot less of maybe the high level kind of shoulder injuries, and I think we're talking in a lot of circumstances quite high level stuff there with Ian. Although the stuff that he did was highly useful in that patient demographic.
Lovely. And Charlotte?
I think from, like I already mentioned earlier, Mike's, for me, in clinical practice, is one of the most useful. That ability to use language and metaphor to explain pain, it's hard enough to explain to adults, and in some ways it's harder with kids. In some ways, kids, as soon as you use a metaphor, they just get it. From a least applicable point of view, I think I'd probably agree with Danni in terms of the exercise prescription. It was stuff that wasn't necessarily groundbreaking, stuff that we all knew already. It was just nice to hear it affirmed and get that message out there to everybody else, how important it is to try and push patients to take that ownership and responsibility for getting that exercise in to help them out.
I think the one thing I would say about Anne's podcast is the one thing it did do afterwards, it made me think about what we know we already have available.
Absolutely.
We've all got those kind of healthy living schemes and exercise by prescription schemes within our community, and within our availability to refer onwards, but it kind of wakes you up to, is there more? And certainly I know that's something that we've looked at work in Nottingham as to pathways for different types of exercise. So, your over 50s, your OA group patients, things like that. So I guess from that perspective, for me, I agree completely with what Danni and Char are saying, that that content we perhaps were already aware of, but I think as a kind of refresher as to sort of where you need to go next, or what you might also need to think about in terms of the patients that you're seeing, it was useful from that point of view.
Yeah, it did seem to galvanise a lot of people. We got a lot of feedback from people that had listened to that podcast and then revisited things like the community schemes, and also helped them to recognise those hard-hitting statistics that they were then sharing with their patients, their local GPs. So definitely had its place, and still a very popular episode as far as I'm aware statistically. The next question then would be, what are you excited for in 2015 as it approaches then? Going to you, Charlotte.
I think for me, hopefully, the ease of podcasting in the future. I think having got 12 months in the bag now, hopefully, the process is getting easier and easier each time. And I think that comes from a recording and an editing point of view. It just seems that we're finding our place, really, and figuring out how to do things quickly.
More debates, mate. I think it was a great way to end the year with the K-tape debate, and I think that could be a really exciting platform to for podcasts, and I think other podcasts will follow suit.
Brilliant. Yeah. Well, we can soon see what we can do. I'm happy to do that. Just happy. It's easy for you to sort of throw that out there and then one off to India for 6 months or whatever it is you're doing. Yeah. Well, we've got you back, mate. You can listen to them on a beach somewhere. Hey?
Yeah, I will.
What about you then, Barnsley? What are you looking forward to?
Well, firstly, I'd agree with Danny. I say, as I sort of highlighted earlier, I think these it's where you're getting two clinicians together, the opposing views, are really, really interesting, I think, and really, 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 really useful. As we've highlighted before, there are some people who've hid behind Twitter handles in calling out people. In some cases, there are some people who've had some really great debates, and I think back to the recent one with Mick Thacker and Diane Jacobs that seem to go on for days and days. But I think getting those two people together and hearing their opposing points of view and making you think, from both sides of the coin is a really, 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 really good way to move forward, I think.
No, lovely. I can agree with all of those points, really. The fact that it's becoming smoother as a process, the fact that we're recognised now, it's certainly easier to get people behind the microphones. People seem pleased to get involved. Also more affiliations as we go along. There's recognition and things coming from all angles with regards to associations, etc.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's something that all of those things that you're looking forward to, I'm sure we can supply. What would be on your educational wish list, both in and out of podcasts then, starting with you, Danny?
I think in terms of joint pathologies and things like that, it'd be great to learn a little bit more about the hip.
Right.
There continues to be a massive debate in regards to sort of, FAI and hip pathologies. So for a guest speaker to sort of explore that, I think would be really interesting.
Yeah, it'd be cool. We'll maybe get surgeon and non-surgeon. That'd be a tasty one, wouldn't it? How about you, Barnes? Any educational plans?
Again, sort of looking at I'm very interested in obviously the pain management side of things. So more Mike. If you could just do 12 months of Mike, that'd be really useful for me.
Barnes.
But no, yeah, it sounds like I'm fawning, doesn't it? But no, I guess I think. Lost my train of thought. Sorry, mate.
Oh, it's just you got Mike on the mind, mate.
Yeah, no, that's what it was.
This is adorable. Did you get a Christmas card? Valentine's Day coming up.
And then I think along sort of similar lines with CBT approach and things like that, and looking maybe outside the box from physio. Again, I know that sort of we've discussed previously about the relevance to non-physio professions of the podcast, and it'd be really interesting to find out some stats of non-physios as to how many people are dipping into these kind of podcasts. But certainly from things like strength and conditioning, which I think is something that we don't know enough about in physio and can be applied even at base levels with patients, rather than just thinking about elite sports people. I think we all had maybe that short module of exercise prescription when we were in university, and we kind of sometimes get stuck in giving out the same old exercises without thinking necessarily about the benefits of strength and conditioning. So that's certainly something that I'm looking for this year, and be interesting to hear about, from somebody with that level of expertise.
Happy to call some people out on that. I think that's a really good idea. And Charlotte, what do you think about your educational goals coming into 2015?
I think from my point of view, from a podcast potential, it would be nice, obviously working in peds, it would be nice to get something out there. I mean, our biggest footfall from a podcast point of view is for mainly MSK adult physios out there. I think it'd be nice to get kind of a when to worry, when not to worry, what's normal for kids, what's not normal for kids, some sort of platform of that, so that if that one ped walks through the door, you don't think, oh, what am I going to do here? How can I turn everything into a game? And just think, is this normal? Is it not? I think that would be quite a nice platform and reference point for people to go to, because it's kind of few and far between that does happen in adult practice.
Yeah, and I think that's useful as well, because certainly from my perspective of working in private practice, you never know what's going to walk through the door. We all like to think we're going to see 16, 18 to 80, 90-year-olds, but sometimes somebody will come in with a young child who's been at the football pitch, or a young child with needs outside of our MSK expertise, and certainly that would be useful.
Nice, yeah, that's not a bad idea. You've got an interest in some, that nearly sounded weird, adolescent injuries, Danny?
Oh yeah, that's dangerous, mate. Yeah, absolutely, mate. I think certainly in our clinic, when not just in private practice but in NHS settings as well, we often get a benchmark of age 16 or above to come in through the door, but that still puts them under the realm of sort of adolescent MSK problems. So it's something which our education at university certainly lacks. A bit more of an appreciation and education around that would be certainly handy.
Well, that's what we had planned for then, guys. Thanks a lot for that, and I really appreciate it. And I'm often saying it on every podcast, you guys are the people that have been hiding away from the microphones, and I really appreciate your time. Is there anything else you'd like to add before we wrap this one up?
I think just I hope things go from strength to strength in 2015. Really, it's been a great year watching the podcast grow, watching your ability to present and ask the searching questions grow, and watching Char's fantastic ability to edit grow. So let's hope it just continues in 2015.
Oh, cheers! Anything, Danny, from yourself?
Oh no, mate! It's been a great year, and great opportunity to be involved with it. Hats off to yourself, because you've took this under your wing, and it's your little baby. So congratulations.
Cheers, bud. Thank you very much, Charlotte.
I think the guys have hit the nail on the head, really. Am I allowed to edit everything I've said out of this podcast?
Yeah.
That's why they call you the butcher. I think we're going to leave a few little giggles in at least. No, thank you very much for the kind words, guys, and thanks for your effort. Danny, from all of us, wish you all the best on your travels.
Yeah, good luck, Danny.
Yeah, all the best, Dan.
Yeah, you'll certainly be missed, bud, and we might even need to start looking and recruiting a part-time replacement. So you best come back and return with your A game.
With a better tan.
Well, and a tan. Yeah, you won't tan through that ridiculous beard, though, will you? And so that's the anniversary episode of Session 13 over with. Tune in at our new 2015 launch schedule of the first Sunday of every month for more CPD Gold delivered direct. There are too many people to personally thank, but to all those spreading the word of our work and helping us to improve the product, it truly wouldn't exist without you. To our amazing guests and sponsors, thank you for helping us to share such expertise with the world for free. Happy New Year from me, Jack Chew. Find me on Twitter at chews_health, the podcast team at TPM Podcast, and today's featured guest, Mike Stewart at No Pain Mike. And finally, the only bit that the team wanted to record, I'll see you next month. So, all that is left, and this is a bit of a momentous occasion when we usually hand over this to our esteemed guests, but we've got the cheesy sign out, our now famous calling card. So, over to you guys.
You've been listening to the Physio Matters podcasts,
discussing physio matters.
Because physio matters.
Glorious. No cheese puns this time, though, guys. We've done that to death. All right. Happy New Year to you all. Let's leave it there.
Happy New Year, mate.
And you, pal. All the best.